Welcome into the first of many, a series that Mike and I are going to be working on where we're going to preview. We're going to go conference by conference, team by team. We're going to give you some of our biggest questions, and we're going to kick things off with the ACC on this initial pod/show. Mike, we haven't done anything like this since our big show when we kind of kick things off. We've done some post best ball draft shows along the way, but we're going to kind of get into what we're looking for throughout these preseason camps now that summer's kind of come and gone and we're on the verge of a season now, man.
Yeah, a week away we are right now. So fall camps are gonna starting up here, and we're gonna kind of just do some quick hitters of questions that we'll be looking for through the month of August that could alter our projections and rankings.
Well, I really like doing this because I think what this series is really going to allow is it's going to allow a lot of our subs, a lot of our members to kind of get inside our heads and kind of, see what, give them a perspective of what we like to look at going into the season, real quick. And I'll just touch on this. I mean, most of the guys that, most of everyone that's listening to this, watching this right now, already know what we have going on over at the CFF site, from the preseason fantasy draft guide to the preseason projections. Man, you did a great job on that series on the names to know, where you look at sleepers and possible busts and, dynasty picks. You did a really great job with that. We posted every conference. They're all up and running. This is really the last bit of our preseason content before we start getting into editing, moving things around based on the news that comes in. Before you know it, man, we're going to be at week 0 and projections, rankings are going to be up on the board. You're going to be full-fledged writing your DFS content, and it's going to be full go, man. But this is sort of like our kickoff to the season now, because this is really what we're looking for. Even though we've got our projections, even though we have our rankings done, the one unique thing about our rankings and our projections is that preseason fantasy draft guide isn't static. We move things around as we get news tidbits throughout the offseason. We're going to jockey, there's going to be some players that jockey for position in the projections and the rankings, and we're going to edit those up into the last couple of weeks before the season kicks off, and then we're gonna go in full season mode, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is just kind of what we're looking for in fall camps. I mean, some of the news blurbs that'll come out in the next month, maybe changes, just minor alterations to our rankings, but then maybe we'll get some confirmation news that, hey, that jumps a running back or wide receiver that was in a position battle up 20 spots. So this is just what we'll be looking for.
Well, here's the challenge for us. We're going to try to bang these out, in a matter of days, right? And I think that's really key for us, because how many times do we put out content and all of a sudden there's breaking news 3 or 4 days later, and it's like, damn, I wish we would have just waited on that, right? We would have been able to catch that. So we're going to try to get these out as fast as we can. And the one thing that we didn't mention, Mike, real quick, I know that you're going to, you have a lot of experience with the Discord server last year. Man, our Discord is over 300 members strong already. I think we're going to get over 400 by the time the season kicks off. And that's just a great place to go into, talk college fantasy football. You're going to get injury information all the way through the season, DFS, gambling, whatever you want to talk about. Real quick, man, give us a 60 set, give us a couple of minutes on that Discord for those that are still entertaining the thought of jumping in.
I mean, you are in almost constant communication with you and myself. We are on there constantly answering questions, providing news updates. I think even yesterday, I haven't seen it on the Twitter sphere. We posted the Indiana depth chart that's out there on the media guide. So you can, we'll be posting depth charts and news blurbs and updates that we see throughout the month. And then obviously in season, it'll be full force and we'll be on there 24/7.
Yep. Well, that sounds good, man. Let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the ACC. I think we've teased it now for about 10 minutes, so we may as well get right into it, Mike. And the way we're going to do this is we're just going to go team by team. Each one of us have a question for what we're looking for in the preseason. I I mentioned before we started recording that I went ahead. We'll throw things to you first. I wrote down 2 questions in case to make sure with it we didn't duplicate some of the same questions for the team. So we have some variety for folks, but we're going to go in reverse order of last year's standing. So that means Syracuse is up first on the list, Mike. So let's start there. What are you going to be looking for in preseason camp? I think this one's an obvious one, but I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, I think we'll have the same question. Well, maybe phrased a little bit differently. I said, is Dino Babers going to save his job and start Garrett Schrader? We've seen the last 2 years, and Tommy DeVito isn't it, right? Now, I should preface that by saying that coming out of spring camp, it is DeVito that is the starter. He's got a firm hold of that job right now. Understandable, since Schrader has been on campus hasn't been on campus as long as DeVito. What I'll be looking for this month is if Schrader can start to make moves towards that starting job. The reason I projected him so highly, right, I believe he's going to take over the job. That's why he's in my rankings. I projected him fairly highly in probably the 55 to 60 range. I referenced Eric Dungy a couple years ago, the former starter for Syracuse. He had 24 rushing touchdowns in 24 games as a starter. Garrett Schrader is just as good of a running quarterback as Eric Dungy was. So if he can somehow wrestle that job away from Tommy DeVito, he's going to be a viable asset on your fantasy team. So that's what I'll be looking for from Syracuse.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I knew this one would be obvious. We've spoken about this one ad nauseum, at times. Coming out of the spring with DeVito sort of in the lead, I think you and I are in agreement here that, matter of fact, I've taken Schrader in one of the best ball drafts that we've played, and I'm that confident that he's going to end up being the starter. And for me, we're looking for the same thing. If I went with a number 2 question on there is, for me, is if it's not the quarterback position, for me, interesting. What I'm interested in to see where Taj Harris actually lines up. I know this was something that you and I talked about going into last year. I had concerns about Taj Harris on the outside. He seemed to be very productive in the slot last year. Is that a place where it's going to become more of a permanent home for him? And if so, I really like him as a fantasy receiver in that slot. I like, his ability to kind of get open and operate in space. And I think he's going to be a little bit more or a lot more efficient in the slot than he would be if he's on the outside. So for me, in addition to paying attention to what's going on with the quarterback battle, for me, I'm also interested to see where Taj Harris lines up. Make sense?
Yeah, I'll add a quick note to that. I'm also curious about that. They haven't really had a slot receiver that has emerged there. So moving Taj Harris inside would make sense. And then they would start Anthony Quealy and a redshirt freshman, 6'5", Damian Alford on the outside, who had a good spring camp.
Yep. So let's move to Duke. What are we looking for out of the Blue Devils? This was a tough one here. We know that Chase Bryce transferred to Appalachian State, played quarterback last year. Chase Bryce was
your favorite.
What's that?
One of your favorites. Chase
he
Bryce
was the talk of our jokes most of the offseason. I think he led. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we were talking about. I think he led the FBS in lost fumbles, sacks taken, and interceptions. It was crazy. It almost feels like the offense is getting an instant upgrade by him just kind of moving out of there. So what's your question for Duke that you're going to be watching going into preseason camp?
Well, I had 2, and they both center around the running back position. One, can they end their 20-something year streak of having a 1,000-yard rusher? It's been since 2003 since Duke had a 1,000-yard rusher. They've always split the carries in that time span. My second question, which relates to that, is does Jordan Waters emerge as that running back too?
Yeah.
If he does, then we're going to see a rotation with Mateo Durant, because that's what Duke has always done. Now, there were whispers. I think there was an article on The Athletic that said, I think one of the Duke radio commenters said that Durant should see a heavier workload than what we've seen from running back ones there. So if I want to see how Jordan Waters does this fall camp, that could determine how many carries Durant actually sees this.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. Mateo Durant, that's the question for me. Will he be a 1,000-yard rusher this season? That was my question. For me, I think from a fantasy standpoint, from a fantasy perspective, to me, that's the most attractive player going into the 2021 season. And I think the biggest question is, will he be a 1,000-yard rusher? And to just kind of talking about the workload there, if you just go back the last 5 years, the running back that has gotten the most carries in that offense has averaged 158.2 attempts per year over the last 5 years. So he's got to do some serious work if he's only going to get 150 to 160 carries. I would think, Mike, he's probably got to go 175 plus to kind of get close to 1,000. And I think that's doable. But like you said, we're fighting history a little bit. It's not on our side, but I think he has the talent to do it. And with your question about Waters, this might be the first time in a couple of years that we're going into the season with not a clear running back to it, Duke. And maybe that does help Durant's stock.
Yeah, I mean, he had he barely played so far in his career, but he did have a 50-yard touchdown in the spring game. Maybe that's a sign of things to come. Running back 2 does average 110 carries per season in the last 7 years. So usually somebody is included other than the starter.
Let's hop down to Tallahassee, Florida State Seminoles. Mike, what are you looking for there going into preseason camp? There's a lot to look for there. So this I'm interested to hear what you're looking for. And look, we didn't reference this on the onset. We didn't go over these questions with one another. We kind of wanted to keep them separate. We wanted some variance here on the question. So I don't know where you're going with this, but what's your question for the Seminoles going into preseason camp from a fantasy standpoint?
Well, I thought you would have guessed it. I think it's all about the quarterback position for Florida State. Just in the sense, I feel confident that Mackenzie Milton's going to wind up winning that job. He is 100% healthy from all accounts, what we heard during media day. The reason I'm focusing on the quarterback position is because how it affects all the other positions. Now, if Jordan Travis were to somehow win that job, there goes some value with Jashaun Corbin, right? Because he's Travis being more of a runner.
And possibly Andrew Parchment at receiver, which is a player that we're projecting wide receiver 1 there, right?
Correct. That's exactly where I was going to go next. I'm hoping with the amount of shares that I have of Andrew Parchment that Mackenzie Milton, the better thrower of the two, wins that job. So Milton was trending up in the back half of the spring. He's 100% healthy. I do think he'll win that job. Which will in turn benefit, I think, Jashaun Corbin and Andrew Parchment.
So for me, that was the part 2 question, because I knew you would probably go quarterback. But for me, I'm looking at more Jashaun Corbin. And just like you said, a lot of that's going to be dictated on what happens at quarterback, because Norvell's history, I mean, he's got a great history of productive fantasy backs in his offenses, right? And so we know what Jashaun Corbin was capable of when he came over from Texas A&M. But the offense just was not good last year, right? And so you're right. I think I'm with you there. We're watching to see what happens at quarterback, because for me, that ultimately affects the running back spot and the receiver spot. And so that is the biggest question going into camp. Preseason camp for the Seminoles, pretty straightforward, very easy on that one. Hopping over to Louisville, what are you looking at there? Because there's other than McHale, at quarterback there, turnover in running back, attrition at running back, attrition at receiver. So I know you're going running back with this, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong. No, I mean, I did not go running back because everything that we've heard from Scott Satterfield indicates that it will be Jalen Mitchell being that quote unquote workhorse type back. He's mentioned it multiple times now this offseason. Now, are we for certain that that's going to happen? No. I mean, they do have good depth in that backfield with Hassan Hall and Travion Cooley, but all the tea leaves are kind of pointing in that direction. I'm more interested to see who emerges as that wide receiver 1 or 2 for Louisville. I mean, they're losing 141 targets with Atwell and Fitzpatrick now gone. We didn't get a ton of answers in the spring. I mean, we had Braden Smith, a guy last year who had 100 yards in the opener, but then completely disappeared after that. I know the 24/7 Louisville site is touting Jordan Watkins, a redshirt freshman, as the possible wide receiver one. There's a couple of other guys in the mix. I don't think Shai Wertz, the Georgia Southern transfer that played quarterback previously, is going to be much in the mix. But it's just we're very unsure of who that wide receiver one is, and I would think with an established quarterback that somebody is going to be viable relevancy in terms of fantasy for that offense.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the reason I went running back there, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about running back, but for me, that is the biggest question. And unfortunately, we know what we're going to get going into the season, but I'm more curious to see how it unfolds during the season because will Mitchell be the workhorse, right? Like you mentioned, they've got a few mouths that they can feed. How big will his workload be? Ultimately, that's going to affect his long-term fantasy value in this offense. And so for me, we know that he's likely the running back one, but is he going to shoulder the load that we're used to seeing with Javian Hawkins a year ago, right? And so for me, that's hard to project going into the season. That's something that we'll find out 2 or 3 games in, but great point there with the wide receiver. So much unknown. And another one, another point right there too, Mike, it could be a couple of weeks into the season before we really figure out who's going to emerge as that wide receiver one for Louisville. Georgia Tech. Let's go down to Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets. Here's one that I had a little trouble with, but I found one. What's your question? What are you gonna be looking for Georgia Tech going into preseason camp?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a top 20 type back. There's not a ton of question marks aside from maybe his workload. They're splitting carries with Jordan Mason. I'm more curious about Jeff Sims, the quarterback. See if he takes a second-year leap there. I mean, he was very inefficient last year, 55% completion rate. He had more turnovers or interceptions than touchdowns, I believe. But he got it done with his legs. So I'm looking for improvement with his throwing, with his accuracy, with decision-making. If those types of quotes come out during fall camp, then I think my impression of him going into this season will improve because of his legs. That just provides tremendous upside.
Yeah, I agree there. I think paying attention and reading the tea leaves on how Sims is developing as a passer is going to be the key to that offense and growth, right? I mean, we talk about Gibbs all the time. I love Gibbs. I actually think that Gibbs is he's going to be playing on Sunday. My biggest question about Gibbs is whether or not he's going to produce from a fantasy perspective as well as his ADP right now, which I think he may be going a little earlier just based off of talent alone. But you're also looking at a back that could catch 30 passes out of the backfield. And if Sims can really develop as a passer, that probably helps Gibbs' fantasy value as well, catching some of those balls out of the backfield. So I'm with you there. I think this was an easy one for us. It's all about the development of Sims in preseason camp going into year number 2 as the starter. And really that offense is we know what Gibbs is going to do. We know what Gibbs is going to provide. We know he's electric and he can be productive, but that offense is only going to go as far as Sims can be efficient, right? And so that's what it comes down to there. How about over to Wake Forest, Mike, where obviously we know that they lost Donovan Green in that wide receiver core not that long ago, right? Kenneth Walker III transferred out of there. He's now at Michigan State. So what's your questions? What are you looking for Wake Forest going into the season here?
Yeah, I went with the recent news and who's going to take over for Donovan Green. Now, we didn't have him. We had him ranked within the top 100, so he's probably a guy that would have been rosterable in college fantasy. Obviously, he was playing second fiddle to Jaquari Roberson, but we want to see who emerges at that wide receiver 2 position. And I think it's an interesting dynamic, and we were talking about this on a previous call, where Roberson spent, 76% of the time last year in the slot. And he's not a short guy. I think he loves 6 feet tall. Will he shift outside, and how will that change the dynamic of where they Wake Forest uses their receivers. I know A.T. Perry is going to be in the mix. Taylor Morin, who will be our wide receiver 2 now in our rankings. He's going to operate solely out of the slot, I believe. Donald Stewart, a former Stanford transfer, he had a big spring from all accounts, was better than Perry, who struggled with drops last year. I really want to see where they slot in Roberson in terms of alignment, either inside or outside, because that'll determine in a big way who will actually be that wide receiver 2, I believe.
Yeah, and that's something we've talked about. That's the question there for me as well. And I think from there, the biggest questions just go in season 2, right? We know that Kenneth Walker transferred out. You've got Justice Ellison, Christian Turner, the Michigan transfer there. Who's going to be running back 2? And this is something we may not find out till we get a couple of weeks into the season, but is Bill Smith going to carry more of a load this year, or is it going to be more of a true split like it was a year ago? Because with Walker moving out of there, that does create a nice opportunity for Bill Smith to get more carries and shoulder the load in that backfield. The question is, will he? But I think he could be a nice little a late steal in the draft, depending on how heavy of a load he gets. And that may determine just about how effective he is early on in the season, and really how effective the running back 2 is, coming out of camp.
Yep. And I just, if we're going to add a second question for me, I would say if Sam Hartman has recovered from that mental beating he took after 4 interceptions against Wisconsin. I know he was taking a lot of heat on social media after that game. He wasn't as good as we anticipated last year, but no. I do still have belief in that offense, and he's proven to be a good player at times. So I really want to see if he can have a bounce back year.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I mean, his numbers were not great at all last year, but he fits the offense really well. His skill set does. It's all about obviously from the bowl game, it's all about decision-making for him. And if that improves for him throughout the offseason, from last year to this year, then that Wake Forest offense could make a big jump up. Yeah. Virginia, this is one that's near and dear to you, I know, because your love for Brennan Armstrong. So I'm curious to see where your question for Virginia, what that looks like going into preseason camp.
No questions about Brennan Armstrong. He's a bona fide top 10 quarterback this year in college fantasy. My question's at the running back position. It's been, kind of a wasteland these last few years. But Bronco Mendenhall continues to mention every single offseason that he wants to settle on a workhorse. And I know we haven't seen it the last 2 years. And the quarterback obviously runs the ball quite a bit for Virginia. So that kind of dips into the volume distribution. But people forget that Jordan Ellis ran for 215 carries in each of between 2017 and 2018. So Bronco Mendenhall wants to settle on one guy. Who that guy is, I really have no idea. I think Wayne Talapapa is he's a jag. He's just a filler, right? I think he comes out of he came out of the spring as a starter, but they got Ronnie Walker from Indiana. He played a little bit last year, but he's in the mix. Mike Hollins is back after opting out of last season. He was a high 3-star, low 4-star recruit, so he's got some talent. They got a 3-star Ahmad Foston, who I think Mendenhall or maybe the offensive coordinator said is the best pass catcher already out of all the running backs. So they got a lot of guys back there, but Mendenhall continues to reiterate that he wants to settle on one. If they settle on one, I'm not sure, but he could be a valuable asset, the running back 1 there, if they settle on one guy.
So I agree. I think going into last year, the guy that I really had my eyes on was going to be Mike Hollins until he opted out. I still, for me, is the guy that I'm really keeping close tabs on. I think he may be more of the guy that could be, he's built to me and could be more of the workload back. Now, here's the thing. Do we want that to happen now? Because, I mean, obviously, Brennan Armstrong's he's going to shoulder a heavy load in that running game, right? So the more difficulty they have in identifying a true running back 1, probably the more valuable Armstrong is in and around the goal line too, with the ball in his hands. I'm going to take a little bit of a different route for this one, because I do think finding a replacement for Lavelle Davis is going to be something that we're also going to be keeping tabs on too. I mean, I think that's a big loss for that offense last year with just how efficient he was vertically. it'll be interesting to see who takes his place. We know that Billy Kemp's going to be a frequent target of Armstrong. He's going to be, he's extremely valuable in PPR leagues. How will he become more of a red zone target now with the loss of Davis? We don't know. Guys that we look at as Rashawn Henry, maybe Dontavian Wicks. And then you would also think with Rashawn Henry being lost now for, I think, most of the year, if not all the year, the tight end Jelani Woods now becomes an integral part of that passing game, particularly in the red zone too. So I'm curious to see how that offense develops throughout preseason camp and who really kind of puts their hands up or draws a line in the sand on who's going to be that number 2 receiver on the outside for Armstrong, because we know who's going to be in the slot. We know who's going to play tight end, but who's going to emerge as that vertical threat in an offense.
Yeah, just real quick. I think Jelani Woods is going to fill that kind of red zone threat. I mean, he's 6'7", so he's a tree in himself. And then just a real quick point you made on Armstrong and maybe if they settle on a workhorse. Now, when they had Jordan Ellis, who had 200 carries in 2018, the starter back then, Bryce Perkins, also had 200 carries. So if they settle on a workhorse, that shouldn't really take away too much from Armstrong's carries this year.
Good point. Could limit a little bit more of the production on the receivers, though, but good point on the running game. What about Virginia Tech now? Let's go over and talk about the Hokies here. What's your questions going into the season here?
My question was, will we care at all about Virginia Tech in college fantasy this season? I haven't drafted a single player from Virginia Tech. Maybe the quarterback, Braxton Burmeister, becomes a viable option. They said he's going to get between 10 and possibly 15 carries a game this year, which obviously is something that we like to target in our quarterbacks in college fantasy. But I'm not confident in him as a passer, so I'm not really targeting the receivers, even though they're very talented. Running back is hardly ever a position that we target at Virginia Tech. I know Khalil Herbert had a breakout year, but I think he averaged something like close to or over 7 yards a carry.
Yeah,
I don't think
that's
last
year.
Sustainable for whoever steps in. So I'm steering clear from the Hokies this year in college.
Yeah, my question is simply at quarterback. It is in the confidence that they're going to show with Burmeister going into the season. We know that Hendon Hooker transferred to Tennessee. You've got Holston, Blackshear at running back. Those are probably going to be 2 of the top backs there. You've got Trey Turner, Tavion Robinson. You've got 2 really solid receivers. So we can't say that the pieces aren't there, right? So for me, it comes down to what can Braxton Burmeister do with the reins of that offense. And so for me, that's where my eyes are going to be on preseason camp. It's going to be the reports that we're getting on Burmeister out of preseason camp. A Power 5 league best ball league we played in, I took Burmeister as my quarterback 5. Obviously there's, at that point, there's no loss in value and you're drafting nothing but upside at that point. But I do think if he does make improvements this year, he could be a really late sleeper that some folks that may go undrafted and may be some type of early season waiver wire pickups. But I'm with you there. To me, that Hokies offense, it all revolves around the growth and what Burmeister can do at quarterback. What about over to Pitt, man? We know no controversy on quarterback there. We know it's Kenny Pickett running Mark Whipple's offense, right? So what's your biggest question for Pitt going into preseason camp? I have a feeling we may go running back here, but you tell me.
I am going running back, but now I'm having second thoughts because I wish I would have chosen a player that I know how to pronounce his name. I did this in a
let's just say Israel Abanaconda. Does that sound about right?
Izzy A? I don't know that. Izzy. We'll go with Izzy. I want to see if Izzy is the second coming of Le'Veon Bell. Now, do I think he's the second coming of Le'Veon Bell? No, but that's the comparison that the coaching staff used during the spring ball, was that he possesses that kind of skill set. I personally kind of see a Jahmyr Gibbs 2.0 with Izzy. Now, while the talent is there, and I think we both agree that we like what we see, we don't target running backs in a Mark Whipple offense.
Correct.
They average right around 151 carries per season. So unless you're really catching the ball out of the backfield, that's just not going to lead to much success if you're only getting 150 carries per season. So and they're going to use Vincent David. They're going to use Kenny Pickett in the running game. So do I anticipate him being, a weekly starter on your fantasy team? No, but would you throw a late round pick on him for possible upside? Sure.
Yeah, and for me, my question is I want to hear about development, maybe some refinement for Jordan Addison, who I think could have a really big year. I know last year, we spoke about this in the offseason too. He had a few drops as well. Maybe he gets those out of his system. He becomes a much more efficient receiver. And I think there's tremendous upside in that Mark Whipple offense for Jordan Addison in year 2. And so I'm going to be really paying attention to some of the reports that are coming out of camp on his progress, because I really feel he may be one of those receivers that I may have a little bit farther down on the list than I probably should. And he could be one of those players throughout preseason camp. If we're getting some good news on him on development and progress, he may be a player that climbs up my rankings a little bit.
Yeah, I think he's best in a full point PPR. I think his yards per catch average was pretty low last year. Yep. And he's not a guy that's obviously going to be a top red zone threat. So he's definitely best served in a full point PPR league. But I agree with you.
Good point. Yeah, good point on that. Boston College. Here we go. We've talked a lot about Boston College in the offseason. Passing offense, there's no shortage of weapons now. It's not just 3 yards in a cloud of dust over at BC anymore. So what's your question going into preseason camp there?
Yeah, I want to see how the target distribution changes with Kobe White back in the fold. I mean, I don't think people should forget that he led the team in receiving back-to-back years before last year. So, I mean, this is a guy that has proven that he's a guy capable of putting up decent numbers now, and now he's in a better offense. So, Zay Flowers, I think, is the alpha of that group still. He's the most talented player, had over 100 targets in 11 games last year, but they got 4 capable receivers there now with White back in the fold. CJ Lewis, Jalen Gill, all talented players. They added Trey Berry as the tight end. I don't think he's going to get the 89 targets that Hunter Long received last year. So maybe some of those will go towards somebody like Kobe White. That doesn't diminish Zay Flowers' target distribution at all. But I'm very curious to see how Kobe White integrates himself back in the fold, and if that actually decreases the value of.
Yeah, that was the question I had too. What is Kobe White's return? How does that impact the passing game? How does it impact Zay Flowers? And then same thing what you just mentioned too. With Hunter Long last year, he went for 57 catches, 685, and 5 touchdowns last year. Do we anticipate Trey Berry to have that type of year? Maybe not necessarily, but the one thing we do know is the potential is there in that offense. And I know for sure that's a guy that you and I have talked about, and we'll definitely be paying attention to him throughout preseason camp to just see the involvement and how they incorporate him into that passing game with so many weapons that they have. And really, Phil Jurkovec should make a huge jump up this year. No shortage of weapons there on the outside, but I am going to pay attention to Trey Berry and see how they're using him in the preseason leading up to the season, because we know what the potential is based off of last year for tight ends in that offense.
Yeah, I looked it up this morning. Boston College was 104th nationally in run play percentage last year. So I think that could drop even further this year. And we've talked about this offline, how they don't have an AJ Dillon in the backfield this year. All their running backs are pass catchers first, not runners. So I really think this BC offense is going to be chucking it around the yard.
I think you're really going to see a true running back by committee in that offense. I just don't know if there's one guy. And like you said, the run game's going to be, it's going to be secondary in that offense, and the pass game really is going to be what we're going to keep our eyes on there. North Carolina, we talked about earlier in the show, a team that, there was a lot of attrition. North Carolina's one other than quarterback, running back, wide receivers, a lot of questions here. What are you looking for going into preseason camp?
Yeah, I want to know who the running back 2 and wide receiver 2 are. I think we've it's pretty established at this point that Josh Downs is going to be the lead dog at receiver, and Ty Chandler is going to lead the backfield. Who those second guys are is what I'm most curious about. I mean, with Sam Howell throwing the football, you're going to have multiple receivers being heavy producers in CFF. I think, let's see, it's 51 catches, 849 yards, and 8 touchdowns for the wide receiver 2 in Phil Longo's system. So not always the case that somebody emerges to be that solidified wide receiver 2, but we have a couple of candidates that are talented enough to do that. Bo Corrales and Caffrey Brown, I think, are the top 2 candidates to assume that role. So I want to see who kind of emerges of those 2 or somebody else for that second wide receiver.
Yeah,
real quick behind Ty Chandler, Phil Longo also uses a committee, as we saw last year with Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. So we know that Ty Chandler is going to be the lead dog this year, but we know that the second, maybe third, but the second guy is typically involved in this offense. So DJ Jones, I think, will get the first crack at that job, but they got Caleb Hood, true freshman, kind of AJ Dillon type. He's got some tree trunk legs. I think he'll get a shot too. So we need to see who emerges from those groups.
Yeah, that was the 2-part question for me. You hit on both of them. Is Ty Chandler the legit running back 1, or is he more going to be the 1A versus the 1B, and we just don't know the 1B yet, right? So that's definitely a question for me. The one, and I want to spend a little bit of time on the second one, was we really do want to know who that wide receiver 2 is. This is something that you and I have talked a little bit about, because at times you've been on the Bo Corrales side of the equation, and I've been more on the Caffrey Brown side of the occasion. Now, most of the drafts that I participate in are all best ball leagues. I like, and my argument is that I prefer Caffrey Brown more for best ball formats, because I particularly think he's going to be more of the vertical threat that could go for 100 yards, 90 yards, and a touchdown, and one of those being a 50-yarder, right? Whereas Corrales, we may get a little bit more consistency. We may not get a high ceiling, but we may have a higher floor. Is that sort of where we're still at right now with both of these guys?
Yeah, I think we both agree on who's the more tantalizing talent, and that would be Brown, obviously. But this is a longer discussion where you read the reports and you hear that Sam Howell, when he's talking, he says that Bo Corrales is his most trusted option. So you have to take that into account. And this is a guy who's maybe not a superstar, but he's been productive over his few years there. So, and he's a tall option at 6'4". So, I mean, we just need to uncover who that guy might. Maybe both of them are productive and they have equal value. Who knows? But we're just trying to sort out a pecking order there.
Yeah, and maybe Sam Howell's just roommates with the guy and giving him some nice words. Who knows, right? I mean, look, that's just the way it works sometimes. With these tidbits come out, we talk about it all the time. The one thing about beat reporters is a lot of them are fans too, right? And so sometimes they make picks and with their heart as opposed to with their head. And so it's all about sifting through the data. And that's why for you and I, we want to see the practice reports on what actually happens, what happens in these scrimmages. And we pay more attention to that than sometimes we do with just words that come out of these reporters about who they actually like, because sometimes there's favoritism there too.
Sure.
NC State, let's go to the Wolfpack, Mike. What are we looking for preseason camp going into the season there?
Do we get any hints during fall camp that Zonovan Knight is going to get more touches than he has in the past? Now, it's just been as much as you think Zonovan Knight is a better player than Ricky Person, the coaches are going to be stubborn. That's how college coaches are, and they're going to continue to give Ricky Person carries, and they value his contributions to the team. So I'll just be looking at coaching quotes. Do we get any more hints that possibly Knight will see more touches in this offense than in years past? And I was looking back, I mean, Tim Beck, the offensive coordinator, has had a committee approach the last 5 years. So the likelihood that, it's going to be 200 plus carries for Knights is probably pretty low. But I do want to see maybe the coaches will stop being stubborn and see that talent emerge. So that's kind of what I'll be looking for there.
I'm spot on, right on with you. For me, it's, I don't know if we could say, is it going to be a breakout year? Because I feel like Knight had a solid year last year, but will we even see more now in year 3? Last year, he only had 7 more carries than the year before, but he doubled his touchdown on the ground. He doubled his touchdowns on the ground, and he caught 20 passes last year, after only catching 7 as a freshman. I think he's in for. I think the potential is there for a heavier load this year. I really like Zonovan Knight, so we're both going to be looking at that. And then I also think, I'll throw this out there, maybe Emeka Emezi at wide receiver could be a late sleeper for a lot of fantasy people out there. I feel like he's not getting any attention whatsoever, and maybe you can get him on a lot of back end of drafts if you're going to punt at receiver. Let's talk about Miami Hurricanes. We got 2 teams left, Mike. Miami, obviously, well, I'll throw it out to you first. What's your question with the Hurricanes here?
Yeah, just the health status of Derek King and Donald Chaney. Everything that we're hearing and reading looks good, right? Derek King's on track, going to be healthy for the season opener. If you're a Derek King owner, you're not going to start him versus Alabama most likely. But you just want to know that he's going to be healthy for this upcoming season if you have him on a dynasty roster or if you drafted him already in redraft. The question I have with King, though, is with all these ACL injuries and these leg injuries, is he going to run as much as he did a year ago and has in years past? Because he averaged 8 carries a game last year. If he doesn't hit that mark, or if he doesn't come close to that, then his value drops for me. So I'm curious not only to see what his status will be for the opener and into the early portion of the season, but how is he looking in practice? Is his scrambling looking good? Is he moving around the pocket well? In terms of Donald Chaney, everything sounds good for him as well, that he's on track to play in week 1. The offensive coordinator, Rhett Lashley, continues to say that he wants a workhorse in the backfield. And Donald Chaney was trending towards securing that running back 1, that workhorse role in this offense. So I'll be curious to see what his health status is as we go closer to the season.
Yeah, and speaking of Chaney, I think this might have been the second shoulder problem that he's had since high school. So hopefully that's not something that's chronic, and hopefully he's past that. For me, the biggest question is just De'Aaron King. I know you and I have spoken about this. I have a lot of hesitancy on drafting De'Aaron King in any fantasy drafts. I've yet to do it this year. I don't see myself doing it. I have to wonder if he doesn't get hurt last year, does he even come back? And, does he just go pro? And the fact that he got, is the fact that he's back just a year where he's trying to stay healthy and try to get ready for a shot at the next level. And so is he going to be a little timid in the way that he moves around? Will he be as mobile as he was or as active as he was in the running game last year? For me, it's too much of a question. I don't know if I'm willing to take on De'Aaron King. I think it's a little bit of a risk. I don't know where his mindset is. We'll see a couple of games into the season, but that's what I worry about King, whether or not, is he really just going to kind of let it loose, let it rip, or is this the year where he just came back because he needed to kind of recover, rehab, and get himself ready for the next level? And if so, maybe he loses a little incentive and motivation. And that's what I'm a little concerned about. But I'm with you. And I don't want to forget about Jalen Knighton either, right? For as much as we talk about Chaney, we know that Cameron Harris is there as well. I'm kind of curious to see Jalen Knighton. There's so much talk about Chaney moving in as the running back 1. Will Knighton see his role increase now in year 2? So there's a couple of questions for me.
Yeah,
with Miami.
I was surprised that Lashley wants to have a workhorse type running back, just because you have 3 talented running backs in that room with all kind of varying skill sets. Knighton being that change of pace, burner in the backfield. I would assume that he would want to utilize all those players in the backfield, but he continues to say that he wants a Ferrari, as he quoted, in the backfield. So we'll see.
Well, while some people may be listening to this for the first time, real quick, so let's just address this. Miami wide receiver one. With there's going to be a lot of people that look at Miami and see that Rambo coming over from Oklahoma, right? But we still got Harley, wide receiver one there, even though with the addition of Rambo, right?
Yeah, I hear people that say Charleston Rambo is going to be wide receiver one. I don't see that whatsoever. It's going to be Mike Harley. Rhett Lashley favors the slot. It's going to be Harley as wide receiver.
I just wanted to throw that out there. I know a lot of people are paying attention to Rambo coming over from Oklahoma, thinking that maybe he lands as wide receiver one. We're not expecting that at all going into this year. Let's get to Clemson, man. This is a biggie now, right? ACC, top of the ACC here. We're ending the show with them. What are we going to be looking for Clemson? We'll try to vary it up, go with two different looks here on what you're looking for and what I'm looking for. Hopefully they're different, but what's under the microscope for you with the Tigers going into preseason camp?
Yeah, I figured you would go with Justin Ross. So I went with the Clemson backfield, just probably because I have a couple shares now of Kobe Pace, but I'm interested to see who emerges in that backfield. It might not matter at all this season, and they might just distribute the touches evenly between Lynn J. Dixon, Kobe Pace, Will Shipley, maybe even Phil Mafah getting into the mix. But I do want to see, Pace was that name that was just trending towards the end of the spring, had a really good spring game, got some positive quotes from his running back coach. He seems to be the name that's trending upwards as opposed to Dixon, who I'm very surprised still hasn't transferred out of the program to this point, but he's still there. We might get a committee the entire season. Maybe one guy establishes himself, but I want to see if Pace continues that upward trend. You can get both Dixon and Pace at a relatively cheap price. They're not within the top 60 of ADP on Fantrax. So if you want to get some shares of the Clemson backfield, draft them both pretty late in drafts and see what happens.
Yeah, this was, look, when you have a position like running back at a school like Clemson, we spend a lot of time talking about that. You just have to, right? And so there's, and then you've got people going crazy on Will Shipley, the freshman coming in, but this was something that we talked about. Pace exiting spring sort of has the wave of momentum. And you look at Lynn J. Dixon, we just assumed because he's been there behind ATN that he was going to run with the baton next. There's still a lot of questions going into preseason camp. And that's still to be settled. For me to just go with a different question, and you kind of touched on it, is just that wide receiver, right? We are pretty sold that Justin Ross is going to be wide receiver one. Two questions for me. Is he going to be a 1,000-yard receiver, which the potential is absolutely there, but also just like some of the like when we talked about North Carolina, who's maybe a wide receiver two there, right? I think that's where the value really comes into some of your drafts late on. Is it going to be a Joseph Nagata? Is it going to be an EJ Williams? Who's going to emerge as the wide receiver two in that offense? Because we know, just like when we talk about the Alabamas of the world, when we're talking about Clemson, there's talent all over the field at every position, right? And so I think for me, if in addition to paying attention to running back one, we know who the quarterback is, but who's going to be running back one, and who's going to be wide receiver two behind Justin Ross? And for me, that's another question that I know you and I are going to be really watching throughout preseason.
Yeah, when you have a team that scores 40 points a game, you need to figure out who the backups are, because more than likely they are going to have, or not necessarily the backups, but wide receiver 2 and 3 they're going to be relevant in college fantasy. One quick note that I just thought of off the cuff with regards to Clemson backfield and Will Shipley. I found this stat that relates to Will Shipley and some of the other freshman running backs in college football. The average first-year running back doesn't produce a ton at the Power 5 level. In a pool of more than 400 Power 5 running back signees, going back 5 cycles, 11 ran for 1,000 yards in their first year. That's 2.5% of the last 400 Power 5 running backs in their freshman season. So Is Will Shipley going to play? Absolutely. And I think he's going to get a good share of touches, not only as a runner and receiver, but the likelihood that he's, going to take over that running back one role and going to be a major fantasy asset for you is, as that stat showed, very unlikely. So, and we'll get into that stat with a couple other teams in these.
Yeah, I'm willing to give him a little bit more the benefit of the doubt because it is a recruit that's going to Clemson as opposed to going a true freshman that's playing at Kent State, right? So, but you're right. Sometimes we look at the numbers, we follow that. So yes, the odds are against him. I think you would agree, though, they're going to try to find some way to get him some role in that offense and get him on the field. But in a running back one capacity, probably got some ways to go before we get to that. So, Mike, that's going to do it, man. The ACC show is in the books now. So this is the first of many that's going to come. This is just the start of what we've got going on. You and I are going to bang these out throughout the week. Get them up on the site, and then hopefully get these up with about a month to go, so a lot of people have as much as they can digest as much as they can going into the season, going into the preseason camps, and really allows folks inside our heads of what we're paying attention to going into the season, man. Any closing thoughts on the ACC before we get out of here?
Just a lot of position battles that we're going to be following closely this fall. So yeah.
But that's why they come to us, Mike. That's why we have such a loyal following over at the CFF site, guys. Look, there's not two better guys that you're going to find that really just sink their claws into all this college fantasy football information. Mike and I have a passion for it. We thank you guys for all your support, and you're going to be seeing our faces together a lot more this year. That's going to do it for this show, Mike. We'll see you guys next, where we're going to do, I think, the AAC.
Yep.
All right, man.